right. I'm so excited. This is our first episode of Clinicians Corner. So maybe you want to start with what are some of your best hopes for Clinicians Corner?
Me, let's see, go first. Some of my best hopes. Well, when we were kind of brainstorming as to what this segment could be, or why we would even want it, I think my best hopes were that, that we who are clinicians and treat people in food, in food addiction recovery, we show up and treat people to just be able to give some of that to a broader audience, some of the interventions that we are working with within our community. I
Hmm.
so I wanted to give it to more people that way, but I also felt like it was really important as a way to educate other people who are working in the field. So colleagues who maybe aren't necessarily clinicians, but maybe are coaches or something
Hmm.
along that line, right? That maybe have personal experience and now they want to give back and help people along the way as a way to really give tools and hopefully practice those skills to use those tools just to broaden interventions that they could be using or suggesting to people to use. Um really it was just another way to bring more information without always having to track down some high level expert in these things, that we are also experts in these things because we use them every single day with people. And just to make it a little more practical, allow people to ask questions and we can talk about those things as well. But yeah, so overall it was just meant to be, for me, was more to be that bridge between that high level, very clinical stuff that sometimes we can get into with the Food Junkies podcast, but also making it super relatable, not only to listeners who maybe are on the journey themselves, but also to other people who are working with those individuals, and give them ideas of ways they might be able to help their clients if their clients are stuck or maybe are asking for something more. I don't know. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I am on the exact same page. I think it was to provide some actionable steps for people to be able to
Yeah.
practice some skills. And we both have one-to-one clients, but we also work in sweet sobriety. And so we do a ton of psychoeducation in there on different topics. And I think, when we were talking about doing this, we were like, there's some major things that come up for most individuals we work with.
Yeah.
So if that's happening amongst our community, imagine the broader picture of all of our listeners. And can we help them have some tools to practice, or maybe just start thinking about if, I think a lot of the time, and even in Vera's Facebook group, I sometimes see still so much focus on the food. And I really believe, and we've talked about this before, food is 10%, right? And then
Yeah.
there's that 40%, which really is the psychological, the physiological interventions that can be really helpful, even cognitive interventions. And then the 40% being community. So I really want to focus on that 40% of the psychological, physiological, social, environmental interventions that we can arm people with tools. Because again, it's not just about not eating the thing. And there is so many reasons why we go to the food. It's usually
Yeah.
because, maybe it's trauma, maybe it's comorbid mental health diagnosis, which we know is usually the rule, not the exception. Um, and for a lot of people, it's nervous system regulation, which is what we really want to talk so much about today, and how our nervous system really affects our appetite and our eating behaviors.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I thought we could start by kind of talking about what is the nervous system,
Yeah.
and what role does it play within food. And I think one of the things I think even maybe in high school we learn is about the autonomic nervous system, right? The parasympathetic and the sympathetic. And certainly the autonomic nervous system also plays a role with the endocrine system, which is our
Yeah.
hormones as
Yeah.
well. And we know with our hormones, that's also insulin,
Right.
right? And we
And
also
cortisol and yep, all of
cortisol. We
those
can
things
also
that
talk about ghrelin and leptin,
yeah.
which are hunger and our satiety. And so, really, the nervous system plays an essential role in all of this. And so, it was actually one of our group members that told me what a great way to remember, because sympathetic sounds so like peaceful, right?
But
But
it's not,
what
it's
we know, it's the
actually, yeah,
opposite of that.
it is the
So
opposite.
sympathetic, we just think S for stress. And then parasympathetic, we think P for peace, which I
Yeah,
really love. Now, the parasympathetic does have two branches. According to polyvagal theory, there is the ventral vagal, which is where I feel really safe. I feel really connected. It's like the social engagement system. And then we also have on the hierarchy the dorsal vagal, and that's what we call collapse. And a lot of us are really familiar with this. And maybe some of us use food to get into collapse, to numb, we
yeah,
disassociate. And it feels like a different level of home for many of us
yeah,
when we just don't want to like associate with the world. So again, I think educating on what is the level of parasympathetic we want to be
yeah.
on, and just acknowledging the different states that we can be in and how the state that we're in can actually affect the story that
Definitely.
our brain is telling us.
Definitely. So, because those are such technical clinical terms, I just want to throw some other terminology out there so people can maybe follow along with what we're talking about. So, when we're talking about sympathetic, we're talking about fight, flight, and that's going to be a hyper aroused state. So, if you think of your nervous system as having like what we would call a window of tolerance. So there's like this threshold, right? There's a top and a bottom in which we can have ups and downs within that, and that's going to be ventral vagal. That's where we can have ups and downs within it, but it's not this hyper response. We're not like in that fight, flight place where we're just like, the house is on fire, get out, right? Or anxiety, or like that compulsion to like, I have to do something, right? Like it just feels like an itch I can't quite scratch.
Survival.
Yeah, exactly. Survival. So that's sympathetic. It's that hyper aroused state. Ventral vagal is that window of tolerance in the middle. It's like, yes, there are going to be ups and downs, but it's more the rest and digest. It's more the peaceful, like you were saying, kind of feeling. There are bumps along the way, but nothing that like you're not really like able to kind of manage or roll with. And then there's that dorsal vagal, which is the freeze or numb kind of place. So if you identify with the freeze or flop kind of terminology that maybe you've heard us use, or somebody else use along the way on your recovery journey, that's really what we're referring to when we're saying things like dorsal vagal, ventral vagal, sympathetic, all of that. Does
Yeah, it's
that,
like
yeah,
freeze or flop. I agree.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think the reason why it's so important to talk about this is often when we talk about addiction, we're talking about the brain,
yeah,
right? And, we took that course yesterday, and Deb Dana, who is amazing, talking about befriending your nervous system, really has posited that it is the body does 80% of communication to the brain, and it's only 20% of the brain to the body. So our body is always feeding us information. And I like to think of it as, we believe our brain's in control, right? But it's really like the person who's riding the horse thinks they're in control. Who's in
right.
control? The
It's the
horse,
horse.
right? The horse sees like a snake on the road. Yeah, you're toast. Like that's not going to keep you safe. And so again, if we think about our nervous system like that, we have to know that like the body is constantly scanning the environment for cues of safety for the most part. So,
Agree. Yeah.
whether it's the person you're with or the environment, if my environment is super chaotic, like it's going to be really hard to have a mindful meal and be in parasympathetic and be in that rest and digest. If I'm like most of the time, for a lot of people, they'll be in that sympathetic stress state. All of their energy is like on the heart, on the blood flowing, so it's away from the gut, and we're eating standing up, and we're planning, and I'm on the screens, and I'm watching TV, and I'm shopping, and I'm already got the next 4 years scheduled. That is not going to be beneficial to my digestive process. And I'm going to know it. Usually people will experience indigestion. They'll say, whoa, like I feel really heavy after that meal because we're just speed eating. Right. So
Yeah.
we're not able to tune in to what we call interoception, which is that sweet spot where we can actually tune into our hunger and fullness, which is
Yeah.
also nervous system regulation.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and sometimes too, I think like we're just like trying to get it in as fast as we can because we are in that sympathetic state and we want to just feel better, not realizing, again, biologically driven to do the food thing to bring you into that state. But oftentimes we overshoot it, right? When we're
Mm-hmm.
binging, and then we're like, oh, now we're in freeze. And now we're like guilt and shame. And now we're just, right, struggling to get back to where we really want to be. And so like it's so obvious when we really go back to the body how those environmental triggers and cues can really drive this dysregulation of the nervous system, which then shows up as things like those compulsive behaviors, whether it be, like eating quickly, binging and purging, whatever it might be, even the food choices that we're making.
Yeah, can move us into parasympathetic. But I do want to say, like, the goal is not to be in ventral vagal parasympathetic all the time. A,
Right.
that's not possible.
No.
So don't try for it. Sympathetic is also about our drive, right? So that's how we go to work. That's how we exercise. That's how we have our energy. And we need that. So I like to think of it as like the home away from home, but we need to have that flexibility within our nervous system that we're not getting stuck in one state. And we're able to acknowledge and be aware rather than like disembodied. Oh, this is what's happening for me right now. Like, because I have ADHD, I often, and those of us, our nervous systems are more sympathetic regulated. So movement is very helpful for me to kind of shift back into a ventral vagal state. So, for example, we were on that food addiction call yesterday, which was a 6 hour webinar. It was fantastic, but like, goodness gracious, I cannot sit for that long. So I was, standing up, I was stretching, I was, making some food while it was happening. And that just it actually helps me pay attention and it feels more loving for me that actually staying, just sitting and being forced to sit is quite activating for me.
Yeah.
And then I really have a hard time focusing or paying attention to something. So I just want to make sure that people know like the goal is
Right.
not to hate sympathetic, it's
No.
to be able to flow
Be
flexibly,
flexibly. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, within the
Flexibility.
states.
Yes, that you can notice like, oh, I'm really like agitated right now. I'd like to, and I want to feel something better. How can I just bring myself into that window? Like, how can I get back to that ventral vagal place? And so
Mm-hmm.
exercise is definitely one way to do it. I know we're going to talk about this more here in a little bit, but I love that you brought that up because it's so true. We can't always be in those places. We do have to have some get up and go, right? Like we do have to have some activation. Otherwise, we maybe can get stuck in that freeze state, that dorsal vagal. And that's a state that I think I find myself the most often in. It's so interesting when you and I are together because I
Mm-hmm.
think I bring you down just a little bit and I think you bring me up just a little bit, right? Like our energies play off of each other. And not that I'm not an active person because I am, but I'm not Clarissa level active, right? Like I don't, you have like a whole nother gear that I don't have. And I'm okay with that. I'm totally okay with that. But I think I also bring like this piece of like, hey, it's okay if we just like slow it down a little bit when we're together
It's
for you too. It
co-regulation
is
is what
co-regulation.
happens between
Yeah.
us.
Which is
Absolutely. And the balance is key.
Yes, which is why I love groups so much because even
Mm-hmm.
across the internet, right? Like even across the world through the internet with the power of Zoom or whatever platform you might be using, there is this ability to co-regulate when we can see what other people are doing. Now we have to keep that in mind, right? When we have group and we have somebody like on an exercise machine or whatever, like people will start to say something like, oh, this is really dysregulating to watch this person working out. Meanwhile, this person working out is maybe like a Clarissa who needs to do that in order to stimulate their brain to even be present. And so it's
Right.
really interesting, like the conversations and the dynamics that have to be kind of like, managed in a group situation, but also understanding that's a part of co-regulation is this communication with our words, but also by what we're seeing, right? Body language, that kind of thing, and how impactful that can be on our clients.
Mm-hmm. No, it's so true. And I think the other thing we really need to think about, or maybe even talk about today, is when it comes to our nervous system, it also is like affecting our vagus nerve. Right. And our vagus nerve is from our gut microbiome, and it really goes up and, reaches the hypothalamus. And this is where our hunger and satiety really comes into play. Our perception of hunger and fullness as
Yeah.
well. And so that is, there's the enteric nervous system, and that's kind of like the second brain. And that's the neurons that govern the function of the gastrointestinal system.
Yeah.
And they, excuse me, they all communicate through the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve influences, hunger, fullness, and our mood. It's also the pathway of serotonin. And so, again, looking after our vagus nerve and, by not eating some of these ultra processed foods, that it can have a very positive effect on our nervous system as well, because a healthy gut will help support mood regulation and reduce cravings for some of those ultra processed foods as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So my concern though, right, becomes so many, whatever, like the vast majority of us can handle crisis, just fine. Right. And I shouldn't even say the vast majority of us, but there are definitely people who, like, in times of high, like what we would call acute crisis, somebody's injured, there's been a death, all of a sudden we've lost our job, right? Those kind of things, because they are like, a single event, we manage to get through and we realize, like, hey, we might be in this hyper aroused state, whatever, because our adrenaline's going, we've got to get it figured out. And then doing some of these things that we think about that we're going to talk about later, in those moments can be really helpful. Sometimes just having like a crisis counselor in our back pocket. There are all kinds of like crisis hotlines that we can call, like where there are like 24/7 crisis counselors, not even like related to suicide. It can be like other stuff, crisis in general, whatever it might be. Like there are these tools. But what we run into, right, is the chronic stress. And the chronic stress really wreaks havoc on our vagal tone. And that's really important as we start to talk about the vagus nerve and things that we can do to start to stimulate it in different ways, soothe it in different ways. That as a reminder that if you're a person who has been in chronic stress, mostly because of adverse childhood experiences, traumas, whatever that might be, although let's be honest, probably the vast majority of people have some form of chronic stress, that some of these things that we're going to talk about today are going to take time and patience with yourself and trying over and over again, and some self-compassion as you're doing that, because that vagus nerve has calibrated differently over the years because of this, that, or the other thing. And so we are really trying to we're asking you to start doing things that calibrate it more toward this flexibility within vacillating from sympathetic, ventral vagal, parasympathetic, whatever. So I did just want to
Mhm.
throw that in there, because chronic stress will bring in a whole kind of like, it's just another animal, a whole nother animal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's another layer. And I think something that I heard Deb Dana talking about that was so interesting to me is that, compassion is almost not accessible when we're in a sympathetic state. And that, so it seems so reasonable and rational sometimes for us. Sometimes we may even say to clients, oh, I just start practicing some self-compassion. But in that moment of fight
Right.
or flight or
No,
survival,
that's not there.
compassion is going nowhere.
No,
That is
no.
not when we are able to even access it. It seems like the most unreasonable and
Yeah.
illogical thing to do. And so that's where we need to really have some tools about how can I get from sympathetic to parasympathetic in a healthy way. And I think I think it's going to be really important for us to talk about some of those skills
Yes.
today, about how to help people, whether it's, pre-meal nervous system regulation to help people get out of sympathetic and into parasympathetic so they can be in that rest and digest. But also when maybe I am in sympathetic or fight and flight, and that's a craving, and how can I
Which makes sense,
start?
because that's what we're going to crave, right? Energy dense foods. That's something we have to
Exactly.
remember as we're talking about this, that it's not like we're not talking about the woo woo. We're talking about real biological things that you are wired for. And that
Hmm.
you are literally wired then when you're in that sympathetic state, that fight flight, that survival, like has been like a internal alarm is like danger, Will Robinson. You are wired to go for energy dense foods, and energy dense foods are not things like lean chicken breast and steamed broccoli, right? Energy
Or
dense
nice lean pork chop. No.
no. Like energy dense foods are the sugar, fat, salt combinations that we often talk about in food addiction being like the problematic things, right? Sugar, flour, sweet taste, whatever, those things are energy dense. And so to know that, like you were just saying, like cravings will start to show up for people.
Hmm. And so, like, if you were thinking about, or if I'm thinking about some very simple ways to transition from, the hierarchy or stage to stage, or, one branch of the nervous system to the other branch, I think one of my favorites is the sigh, because the sigh is so simple and it is something that we know is a reset. Like, I don't know about you, but I will be in a one-to-one session with a client. And when they start sighing, I'm like, yes. Some people will be like, or like yawning is
Yeah.
another great sign of a nervous system reset. And people will sometimes take that as an affront. But what that actually is, oh, like
Yeah.
I'm just kind of shifting
Well,
to another
it's that
state.
allow, exactly, the allow. It's the allow, like as when somebody's like, oh, like it's that, I think that there are like people might throw the word surrender out there or acceptance or whatever, but for me, it's that allow, like something has shifted where there's now this allowance of like, okay, I can be open to new ideas, to new possibilities, to whatever. I'm just allowing myself to be in this moment as it is, as I am.
Yeah, and you can use it in all three states, right? If I am in collapse or freeze and I am feeling despair, I can do a sigh of despair, right? And
Yeah.
that can help to start to get me, to shift. If I'm in sympathetic and I'm stressed and there's so many things and I'm feeling overwhelmed, I can be like, oh, and then I can also be in ventral vagal and I can be like, oh, like, wow, this is wonderful. I'm just having like the greatest time. And again, this is one of the most simple tools that I think people can use, because I know that breath really changes the body. But I also know when we work with clients who have complex trauma that breath can be regulating, but it can also be activating,
Yeah.
because the body has come up with a way to breathe that feels very safe. And so when we interrupt it and we try to give it new ways of breathing, sometimes that can be really activating for people. So breath is not
Yeah.
usually where I might start with someone. It might be like some light movement that maybe allows them the space to then move into breath. But if we are looking at breath as something that your nervous system would be okay with, then I think what I've learned is that the resistance breath is actually the best breath to practice. And all that is maybe breathing through a straw,
Hmm.
something that, it puts a little effort on the exhale, that
Hmm.
release. And that's what we call the resistance breath. If you want to make it more fun, you can blow bubbles. That's a really fun way to practice the resistance breath. And this can be a very regulating activity for people.
Yeah.
Do you have
So,
any things that you?
so, certainly, like you said, like sometimes the breath, like people aren't ready to go there yet because they
Mhm.
are dysregulated. And so I'm more like a shaker. So like if they're
Okay.
in sympathetic, so if they're in that fight flight, like just hyper aroused state, it might be the shaking. Like, we think about animals in the wild, a coyote or a wolf or something, right? Even watching my dogs, when they're in this highly agitated state, like maybe they've just been like playing in the backyard at each other, right? Afterwards, they shake,
Mhm.
right? And that is a nervous system regulator. So like shaking, or like I will encourage a dance party. sometimes,
Yes.
because music is really, like healing as well, but it just encourages you to move. So you can start there in this, if you're in the sympathetic state. If you're in that freeze, if you're in that dorsal vagal freeze, fawn, flop, like just numb state, and you know that you need to like get your nervous system going, but like you can't, again, like because of depression or whatever it might be, we're not really like willing maybe to go to that breath place. I like to start with little finger movements. So I just take fingers and we just touch each finger to our thumb back and forth over and over again. And then you might start to feel like, oh, now I can like do hands or wrist circles, and then it can move into my arms. And then maybe I'll like start moving my body in a way. And now maybe I feel like I can get out of my chair or off the couch or out of the bed. So even just little simple things like that before we move into breath. Now I know we start each one of our groups in our community with breath, and I always like to give people lots of different options that they can pick from. And so one of them is the alternate nostril. So that would be a little bit of resistance, right? Because we're plugging one side and then the other. I also offer one that I call Buddha breathing or belly breathing, where we put our hands on our belly. And when we inhale through our nose, we blow our bellies up nice and big. Now, a lot of feedback that I get is that's really uncomfortable for me because I don't want to touch my body. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That is fair. That's fair. It's information. We're going to come back to that at another time. That's fair. But there are these, let's look at some of these other options then that are there for you. So yeah, I think that you're right. Like we have to even sometimes start with like half steps, baby steps before we can even get to
Yeah.
the breath. There are other ways to regulate our nervous system.
Yeah, I will say one of my favorite breaths is the physiological sigh, just because, it's the two quick inhale and the long exhale. Again, there's really nothing
It
that brings
reminds me
us
of being in
back.
labor and them telling me
Ah,
out of the,
ah.
I'm
But
like, get
yeah,
out of
I would
my
say
face.
there's a reason they teach you
There is a
that,
reason they teach
right?
that to you. But when you're in that agitated state, sometimes you're just like, get out of my face. I don't want to, it's hard. It's when
Absolutely.
you are in that state, it is hard. And
It's
I
hard
think
to
I just want
remember
to,
any of these
yes,
tools.
it so is. It
Absolutely.
so is. And that actually made me think of, I actually have some other passive ways too, sometimes that I help people start to regulate their nervous system if they can't go to the breath either. One is ASMR, listening to like an ASMR meditation that's going to like walk you through it, or just like ASMR for calm or ASMR for anxiety, right? You can type this into the search bar, Google or YouTube, whatever you want to use for your search engine. And so it's passive, right? Because you just have to listen. That's it. And I recommend headphones, earbuds or headphones, because of the way that ASMR is designed to, just like make different aspects of the brain tingle, so to speak, but also binaural beats. And again, with the
Mm.
headphones. So it's put together with different specific hertz, like sound waves and in a specific pattern to play on those bits of our brain. And that can be another really passive way if you're not ready to go to the breath work, because breath work is work. It literally has the word work in it.
It's action.
It's action.
Yes.
And if you're not there yet, that's okay. There are these
Yeah.
other kind of passive things that can start to move you in that direction.
Definitely. I think another huge tool is just visualization, right?
Mm-hmm.
Visualization, you can visualize movement, you can visualize what we like to call glimmers, right? Like these moments of awe. And so I was just talking to a client about this today, anytime that every time I wake up, as soon as Willa knows I'm awake, I hear this on the bed. And it's her tail,
Right.
right? And
Just
so like it
whap,
just
whap,
starts
whap.
going. She's like, day's gonna start. We're gonna go for a walk. And every time I just even think about that, it feels safe, it feels connected, it feels like home. And so even just having a visualization of that, can bring us into a different state. If I'm maybe down in dorsal, if I'm also down in dorsal, maybe I imagine or like think about going for a walk and what I might see and like the nature in the trees, that can also evoke a shift and maybe get me into sympathetic, which then gets me out the door.
Yeah.
And then once I'm out the door, then I'm in nature and then I'm in ventral vagal. And so again, acknowledging, I think, what state we're in and
Yeah.
what practices work for us. Like this, the practices that work for me are not necessarily going to work for Molly, and
Yeah.
they're not necessarily going to work for everyone, right? And so it's really important to tune in to figure out what is true for you and what
Yeah.
works for you. what
Yeah.
what do you find very regulating?
Yeah.
We can use music, like you
Yeah.
said, to calm
Yeah.
us down. We can also like use it to embrace, the state that we're in,
Yes.
sympathetic state. I might
Make it
listen to
match.
like
Yeah.
ACDC, like Thunderstruck or
Right.
something,
Yeah. Get
whatever
pumped
it is.
up.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's like angry. So there's like angry music. Like I definitely have my playlists. Absolutely, right? Like it's like Five Finger Death Punch and Volbeat. Like that's my angry music, or whatever. But yeah, I'm with you. I agree. Like it can match your mood. If you're angry,
Hmm.
if you're sad, if you're whatever, it can match your mood. And that can actually be a very cathartic way because, and especially if you're singing along, humming along, chanting along, you're stimulating that vagus nerve.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I think it probably might be helpful at this point if we were to share some pre-meal kind of nervous system regulation,
Yeah.
because I think for most of us, what happens is we will start the day in parasympathetic. We usually wake up, but then I'll tell you what, you pick up your phone and you start scrolling. You're in sympathetic because what happens is what we do is we hold our breath when we're scrolling because we don't know what we're going to see. And so we
Yeah.
are expecting danger, and this is a stressor for us. Or we check our email and we have, 16 notifications and emails, and this is today's saber-tooth tiger. So you are
Yeah.
immediately in sympathetic. So don't pick up your phone the first thing that you do. But like I was saying, most of us will be in parasympathetic, then we switch to sympathetic, and we're usually in that state. And it doesn't necessarily need to be completely fight or flight and danger, but we're probably, going back and forth between ventral vagal or sympathetic. And then it comes to mealtime. And, most of us get that 1 hour or maybe even half an hour.
To
And
get
it's
ready.
like,
Yeah.
okay,
To
how am I
do all
going
the
to
things.
be regulated and like eat my meal and rest and digest prior to that? Like, again, for a lot of people, just sitting down and doing some deep breathing is going to be probably inaccessible, or listening to a mindfulness meditation might feel really hard. So I might suggest, to ease in, maybe some gentle stretching, right? Maybe some music as a way, just like a little bit slower music. I would say if you're able to sit by a window, nature itself is very regulating and can cause like a pleasant, calm environment. And this helps enhance the digestive process.
Mhm.
Maybe if I have 30 minutes, maybe I'm going to take 10 minutes and I'm going to go for a slow walk
Yeah.
before. I think something that feels easier than breathing or meditation is to do a progressive muscle relaxation. They have
Yeah.
tons of those online as well. And it really like, that's when you like tense and then release, and you tense and then you release. Aromatherapy can be very helpful for people. If you're going to try and activate the vagus nerve, you could do something like humming.
Mhm.
I'll always say hum happy birthday. Everybody knows it. It's easy enough to do. Another thing you can do is gargling.
Yeah.
Is also something that can be really, really helpful. Did you have any things that you
Yeah.
suggest with your clients?
Yeah, I mean, especially, I guess specifically thinking about that first meal of the day, because like you said, sometimes we don't have much time for one reason or another. Maybe it's hard for us to
Right.
get up in the morning. Maybe we have children.
Yes.
Maybe, there are all these things that are happening. And so, yeah, I think anytime we can get sunlight in our eyes outside, like you have to go outside though, right? Because the windows are made to filter the sunlight that we need. It's also getting harder because, like it's
It's
that time of
dark. It's
year.
dark
It's
till
dark right now.
7:30 in the
And it's
morning.
only getting darker. Although once we hit December, 21st or whatever, we will be on our way back out to the longer days. But right now we're on the, and the time will change, all of that. So
Fall back. It
yeah.
will
So if
happen.
yeah, so if you can, unless you're one of the lucky ones in the Southern Hemisphere right now that are, about to spring forward with your time, um, just getting that sunlight in your eyes, even if just for a few minutes. Listen, take your cup of coffee, take your tea, whatever, take it. Go walk out your front door, your back door, and like you said, either a slow walk down to the end of the block and back, or even just standing outside, breathing in that fresh air, getting the sun on your skin, in your eyes, whatever. I would even say even if it's chilly, if you can go without a jacket, that cold air can also help to just do something to our vagus nerve, to that autonomic nervous system. So I would definitely say that. I do like the idea of music. As long as it's not disruptive. I try to do music sometimes in my house, but it's chaos, right? The kids are trying to get out of the house. The dogs are all amped up because everybody's trying to get out of the house. So it just sometimes can add extra chaos. But sometimes it's really fun to like have that, like, yeah, camaraderie in that. And like, we're more present almost even. So like when we eat with others, just like slowing down and being present with,
Eating with others and that
yeah,
co-regulation, that's a
yes,
huge tool as well.
yes.
So many of us eat alone and eat at our desk. And I think that's an awesome tip.
Yeah. And if you happen to be a person who does eat alone for one reason or another, maybe you live on your own, maybe you have a different schedule than the rest of the people in your house. Maybe you're like Clarissa, who doesn't eat breakfast, but everybody else does, you can still regulate yourself, right? Like you can do things. You don't have to have other people to co-regulate. And if you do, it's really neat to like tap into that. Yeah.
Hmm. No, it's true. It's like, even if like, however, in Europe, I mostly ate breakfast because it was already paid for.
Right.
But that there is times where I could just still sit with you and have my coffee and we would, again, be able to experience that time together. And so finding, and that's where I say, like, I love where you say, like, just get outside, or nature is just like, even looking at the horizon
Yeah.
specifically can be a really regulating experience for us. Now, I think it's probably important. We talked a little bit about people with trauma and
Mhm.
why their nervous system, how it becomes kind of dysregulated and how they're always in like kind of, they tend to be sympathetic and then, dorsal, sympathetic, dorsal, and they really
Mhm.
struggle to get to that regulated place. And the best way that I think I can describe it is that we are constantly feeling unsafe. And so, therefore, we are always in a state of stress and we're always in a state of hypervigilance. And
Mhm.
so, what would let you know that this might be something you struggle with is you startle really easily. So, someone comes in the room and you jump, or a noise happens and, like, you have an overreaction or an
Yeah.
overreactive response to some of these things. That certainly lets us know that we're in that sympathetic state or hypervigilance. When there's really, you might be in a safe place and there's no cause for danger, but you're responding in survival.
Yeah.
That is a great way to just kind of like check in and acknowledge, oh, isn't that interesting? This is how I'm experiencing the world right now. Is there a way that I can like check in with my body and what's happening?
Mhm. Yeah. Yep. I would say also, if you happen to be again, if you're a person who lives with other people, if you're noticing like you're always agitated or often agitated when other energies are around you and you feel like the only time you can like really breathe is when you're on your own, that might be a really good, right? So like beyond the
Yeah.
startle, um, that it's
I
like, yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I was also going to say, because the also alternative response is the dorsal, and that just means like, for many people, it means I'm in so much danger, I collapse.
Yeah.
and I play dead. I flop.
Yeah.
And I think I can relate to being in that state in couples counseling, where for me, the situation was anything I say might be misconstrued, and
Yeah.
then that threatens the relationship. So this situation is very dangerous for me. And yet, so I had a hard time putting words together. I had a hard time tuning in. I couldn't organize myself. And at the time, I fully believed this was anxiety. I was like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
just anxious. And so when I get anxious, or maybe it's my ADHD, and now I understand that that whole situation just felt very threatening to me. Now, to my partner, it seemed like I wasn't engaged and
Right.
that maybe she doesn't care, but
Right.
like I cared so much that I was in paralysis.
Yeah.
So I think again, if you find yourself in those situations, sometimes I do it with people pleasing too.
Yeah.
People pleasing is so important to me. Still, it's something I work on. And I may find myself, if it's not going the way I hope it's going, to be in collapse and
Hmm.
disengage or disassociate. So really like tuning in to what are the environments you experience some of
Yeah.
these states in is a really helpful way to help you prepare for it, as well. And then to learn how to take care of yourself after these
Yes.
events as
Yes.
well.
Yeah. And that's where I would say this, like how we were talking about self-compassion, like that's where the self-compassion comes in those moments of when we're in that sympathetic state or we're in dorsal, you're not necessarily, like you said, going to be able to be like, what would be the best thing for me right now? What would be the most
Yeah.
loving thing I could do is like maybe have some compassion. No, but to have compassion for yourself and understanding that you are a person who is retraining your nervous system that was trained potentially even in utero, right? That
Hmm.
all of this is what's called pre-verbal trauma. This is pre-verbal trauma. This is in utero. This is like 0 to 3, when like the world is just happening and you're like a plastic bag in the wind because you're 0 to 3.
Hmm.
You have literally no influence. And then after 3, you don't have influence either. I'm just saying like pre-verbal kind of stuff where it's happening before you even have the opportunity to be able to communicate, or you are communicating in ways and the adults around you either are ignoring those communications or they are receiving the communications but you're being neglected, whatever it might be. And so to know that what we're asking today or what we're offering today is this opportunity to start back at the basics, to really like build this kind of like foundation that is not a house of cards, and it's more like like something made out of like bricks or stone, that there's solidity there's something that you can stand on and work on, because it's always, I don't know about you, Clarissa, but whether I'm in group or I'm one-on-one with a person, it seems to me like oftentimes it comes back to a nervous system regulation, that if that person in front of
Hmm.
me is, as I'm watching them, like breaking down in some kind of way or really struggling with something, right? There's resistance or there's emotion, or they're saying to me, I don't know what I need. I don't know what I want, right? Like when it's that I don't know, I don't know, I don't know.
Hmm.
For me, it's like I'm always going to go back to regulate the nervous system, because once we come back into us and we're in our home, right? When we're back in our
Yeah.
bodies
We find the words.
and it feels safe in our bodies, because it doesn't feel
Hmm.
safe when it's like, "Woo," but yeah, you're right. We find the words, we find the way to communicate, or we find a way to let other people try to help us find the words or what it is that we're trying to express. But when we're
Yeah.
in that place of like, this isn't safe, it isn't safe in my own body, why would I even let you in? Right.
Right.
Then we're not going to get anywhere. And that's where, you, the listener who maybe is on this journey, this is important information for you, because you may want to go take a look at or start trying out some of these things that we're suggesting to start regulating. And maybe you, whoever might be the clinician, coach, therapist, maybe you're the PA or the RN, like whomever you are, it's just really important that if you have this person in front of you that you're, maybe in your brain, you're thinking is resistant to like the things you're telling them to do, or like you're having like these big feelings, like you're having big feelings about the person in front of you. I think that's really good information that the patient or client in front of you is dysregulated, and you are now dysregulated because they're dysregulated,
Because of
and
it. Yeah.
you are escalating a situation that what we're suggesting is can be de-escalated by doing some of these very like innocuous
Simple
type,
practices.
yes, things. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think just one last piece to add on the self-compassion,
Yeah.
self-compassion certainly is nervous system regulating, but I may not be able to come up with the statements in the
Yeah.
moment. But something that we can do is self-compassionate touch, right?
Yes.
And that feels a lot more accessible than like a 5-minute meditation,
Yeah.
that we know that physiologically 20 seconds of giving ourselves a hug,
Yeah.
like, the body
Or
doesn't
even the face.
necessarily, know the difference
Mm-hmm.
between us giving ourselves a hug and someone else. I love the face,
The
like
face. Yeah.
hold. It
Mm-hmm.
just feels also so loving. And that when we are, the other aspect of self compassion, it's really about reflection and repair to self,
Yeah.
right? For the difficult moments that we didn't necessarily handle in the best way, because nobody gets it right all the time. We all yell at our kids, right? We all yell at our partner. We all say things we don't mean. We all respond from an emotional place, a sympathetic place at
Mm-hmm.
some point in our life. So the important part is not to always prevent those things,
No.
but it's to reflect and repair, right? Repair relationship with whoever it happened with, and repair relationship with self, for understanding, oh, I was in that state. So this is what was happening for me. That's when we can apply compassion.
Yeah.
And that's what can bring us back to ventral vagal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that's really important as we're talking about this to point out too is a lot of these things that we're talking about are like those acute moments, those in the moment, I'm in crisis moment, here are things that we can do. And thinking again about that chronic stress, or even not even chronic in that way, but in how will we remember in those moments that this is what we want to do. And so something we really talk about is practicing these things when you're not in crisis. So practicing
Yes.
that hug, that face hold, head on your hand on your head and hand on your heart, practicing the shaking or the breathing or the music or the singing or whatever, practicing it when you don't need it. Like you
Right.
need it.
I
You
do the
always need
physio
it. You
I
always need it.
literally
But
do the physiological
yeah,
sigh in the car while I'm driving all the time. And it's
yes,
just like so calming. I'll also listen to like, again, self-compassionate like meditations, because
yeah,
it's like learning a new language.
yeah,
So we don't necessarily have the words if we're somebody who's been in self-judgment our whole life. And
yeah.
so, self-compassion is really the antidote to self-judgment, but it doesn't come easy. It takes
It does not.
practice
Lots
too.
of
And
practice.
so, for a lot of people, it feels really like floofy when you
Yeah.
start. And, I even made the face, when I was like, I'm like, oh, this is hard, like, but now I self-compassion touch my chest,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
almost every group.
Totally. I'm
Um,
there too. I'm like, oh, one hand, two hands. If it's two hands from Molly, like I'm feeling you, really
yeah.
feeling you. Like,
And it's
it's,
it's just
yeah,
such a game changer. And
yeah,
I think what we've learned is, from at least from our group members, is the things that we're most resistant to tend to be the game changers for us in recovery.
right. Because it's not actual resistance. It
Right.
is that feels unsafe. And even
Yeah.
if our brain knows that is my path, like that's how I get well, the body is like, no way, no way. And we
Right.
have
So
to somehow make
taking
these match. Yep.
Yeah, taking small nervous system steps to
Yes.
getting there, right?
Yes.
Journaling is a big example, right? If
Yeah.
it's like, oh, yeah, we know that this is all the research and it's a concrete way to see your thoughts. Seeing my thoughts feels really unsafe.
Yes. Yes. Or if it's and seeing our thoughts, but also like this fear that like if I put it out there, what's going to come out? Who's going to read it?
Mhm.
When I read it back, it sounds quote unquote crazy, or whatever. And I'm like,
Yeah,
just write it down and then destroy it. Do you know how
right.
every morning I write and burn it? Every
Mm,
morning I do that.
beautiful. It's a
Right?
release,
It's
right?
total release.
That's what it's meant to be
It's
used
total
as,
release. And I
not the
watch the
journal
smoke
to,
take it away.
yeah.
Yep. Nope. And I'm like, it's sending it out to the ether. There it goes. It is not mine. It's not mine. It's not mine. And I'm giving it back to wherever it goes. And certainly you don't have to do that, but I'm just saying like, it doesn't even have to be journaling. It could be
Right.
things like, maybe you are interested in meditation, but you feel like you're a quote unquote bad meditator. I always laugh when people say that. I'm like, is there like a gold star,
Gold
A plus?
standard
Like,
of
yeah,
like
like who's a good meditator? Like that's the
the
whole point of
Buddhist monks
meditation.
who live alone in silence
But they would
for,
even say
what
that they're
they
not
don't
good
even
at it.
think they're good. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. It's so interesting to me. But so like even just listening to a meditation with no intention of like doing the practice, but just listening to the words first, to the sound of the person's voice, to the things that they're saying, to the sound of like if there's a bell or a sound bowl or something at the beginning and at the end, just little half steps that even start to increase your feelings of safety about these
Mm-hmm.
things. Right. Or like you were saying, a progressive muscle relaxation thing where you're
Mm-hmm.
just listening to somebody say, all right, you're going to start at your toes and you're going to like, you know, tense up your toes and your feet and
Tense and
5,
release.
4, 3, 2, 1, release, that can be, those half steps, those baby steps. And then you can move into the breathing exercises. And
Right.
there's so many to pick from. And you can do them when you're like driving your car and you're at a stop sign. You can
Yeah.
be
And
practicing
active
these things.
meditation is another thing that I think I really found powerful at first, because I think I was feeling a little unsafe about knowing like what my thoughts were,
Yeah.
just with like the quiet breathing ones. And that I find from hiking with
Yeah.
challenging terrain, right? So you have to take mindful steps because you don't want to break your ankle. So just being, that's a very active meditation when I have to watch exactly where each foot goes, because maybe I'm stepping on rocks, maybe I'm stepping on, that kind of unlevel terrain.
Yeah.
That's a very simple active meditation that you can
Yeah.
do as well.
Right. And I would say beyond meditation, it is a mindfulness technique in that like
Hmm.
you're paying attention to the next 3 feet in front of you. And
Yeah,
that is
so
training
present.
so present. And the thing is like I think people forget that that is a skill that can span other areas of our life. So
Well,
if
it grows the gray matter in our prefrontal
well it
cortex,
sure.
right?
Yeah,
Which is
absolutely.
exactly about what helps us weigh the pros and cons, helps us build our
Yeah.
GABA, which is the brakes,
Yeah.
when we have those impulsive decisions. So, these practices really do benefit our recovery in so many ways.
It's a holistic, exactly. It's a holistic perspective or benefit, I guess, is what I'm trying to say there. Not only that, but if you start, let's say you do hike or you go on a walk with difficult terrain, or you maybe you kayak, or maybe, whatever. I'm trying to think of like what's something that maybe not a lot of people do, but like would be so common, right? Um, is that when we can just stay like, okay, I can only do what's right in front of me, because right now I have that skill that can help us like chunk out our days too. So if your day, you wake up like Clarissa was saying, and you're like scrolling, maybe you're the person like checks your calendar, whatever, and you're like, oh my gosh, this day is like insane. I've packed it all in. I don't have time for lunch. I don't have time for a walk. I don't have time to breathe. What am I doing? That is a skill that come back to you. You can only do what's right in front of you. Okay, what's the first task? You don't have to be thinking about 7 p.m. Let's pay attention to like what's happening right now at 7 a.m. Oh, it's time for breakfast. Okay, what can I do to like bring myself here and just be present in this moment? Right? So that's where you can take skills that you use in other areas of your life and bring it back to this idea of nervous system regulation. You're training your brain, you're growing that brain matter, you're making your brain more plastic, which is wonderful. And then you can use it when in these times that you wouldn't even think that you could use it. And it's always fun for
Mhm.
me when like I find out somebody has like this skill already, because I want to explore other areas of their life, because this problem isn't always happening. When is it not happening? And we start to explore that and it's
Mhm.
like, oh, look at, you can already do that. What would it be like for you to try it here? Okay, thinking
Mhm.
about that mindfulness of like, where am I putting my feet? I have to be so present. Okay, what could that be like now, right before you sit down for this meal, right before you sit down to respond to this email? Anything that you're feeling like, whoa, 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 like that resistance word to, it's information that you're not feeling safe. What can we do to help you to feel more safe in that space, in that moment?
Mm. Yeah, what makes me feel so present is massage, and I'm so excited I
Ooh.
get one this afternoon.
Woohoo! I'm jealous.
Yeah, I was just feeling joy just thinking about this. You know, I was visualizing when you were talking. I was
Yeah.
present, but I was also like in the future.
So you weren't, but that is really good, right? So like that tactile touch,
That
so massage,
touch. Yeah.
all of that, right? Things like, so that's like a passive way for nervous system
Mhm.
regulation. Things like
Mhm.
yoga, Tai Chi, so things that maybe you're already interested in or doing, or are thinking more like on the active side of things, because right, like there's slow movement, but there's still movement in something like yoga and Tai Chi, and it's about your breath and being present. And when you're in these classes, the instructor is like, come back to your body, come back to your breath, pay attention to what is,
Mhm.
what is your arm doing as you're doing the flow movement in Tai Chi, what,
Well, yoga too, right?
yeah,
You
yeah,
can't
having that
we can't
awareness.
be say enough about, the whole embodiment of yoga.
Yeah,
And again, something that I was super resistant to when I first started, especially like the last part, the shavasana. But I was
yeah,
like, what are we gonna do? Just lie here for 10 minutes. This is a nightmare. Like, and then, a month in after, and this is how long it took.
yeah.
This is really, I really want people to know. It took me a month. And then we were in Shavasana and I fell asleep. And I was like, oh,
Oh, there it
like,
is.
I actually my body started to get excited. I started to
Yes.
look forward, whereas before I was like, "Oh, this is not even a workout. I'm not sweating," but that wasn't the purpose, right?
Right.
But
Right.
for me, who's always in sympathetic, it's like, how do I release this energy? I
Right.
learned that there are other ways to release that energy, just with movement, but gentle movement and
Yeah.
embodied movement, and
And
that
it
was
actually takes
really
you into a different state, right? So like when you're in the
exactly.
exercise, when you're exercising, you're still in that sympathetic
I'm getting
state.
high,
You're still
I'll
getting
tell you.
high. You're still getting high. So we've talked about mindfulness, meditation. We've talked about somatic practices, like, so like the body kind of stuff. We've talked about breathing, but I really, and vagus nerve stimulation, I really think that we need to talk about grounding techniques though, too, as far as like how
Mhm.
that can be so regulating for us. And we can do it when we are activated, if we remember, and we can do it when we're not activated. So it's a better odds are that then we will remember when we're activated. So I'm wondering, like, what are some of your kind of favorite grounding techniques that you use with people or for yourself?
Yeah, well, definitely I teach clients the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and that's, how we ground using our senses. So what are 5 things you can see? What are 4 things you can touch? What are 3 things you can hear? What are 2 things you can smell? And what's 1 thing you can taste? Again, if I'm in an activated moment and I believe saber-tooth tiger is here in the room with me, if I ground myself back to the present moment, I look around, there's no saber-tooth tiger here, but that saber-tooth tiger can be my craving, right? And
Yeah.
and that can be where I'm like, oh, if I don't eat this thing, I'm gonna die. If I don't have
Yeah.
this thing. And so grounding can be really helpful for that. I will ground with scent. So one, people love lavender
Yes.
and I like Christmas tree smell and sunscreen. So I'll take the sunscreen bottle and I squeeze it and it like just like shoots that
Is it
coconutty
because I was going to
delight.
say, is it because it's coconut?
Yeah. It's like I hate eating coconut, but goodness gracious, I could smell it all day. It reminds me of the beach. Like also thinking about the people in Florida right now. Casey
Yeah.
Key Beach is my one of my
Yeah.
favorite beaches, Siesta Key Beach. And it just brings me again, it's that visualization to a place of awe for
Yeah.
me. And that is again, the smell just brings me good feelings in my body. So it
Yeah.
might be that. It could also be, a grounding rock or a
Mm.
grounding statement that
Ooh, what's
I
a good
might
example of a
use.
grounding statement?
I am here today and I am worthy of love.
I love it. I love that you started with the sigh.
Yes, I know because I didn't even realize I did it. See, I was resetting right there, but that's how
Woohoo.
much I love it. Some of these practices, over time, when you do them often enough, they just immediately kind of evoke this response, and you just got to be an eyewitness on that.
Yeah.
What about you? What are some
Yeah.
grounding things that you like?
So I really like some visualization. So I really like thinking about almost like root chakra kind of stuff. So like I envision like behind my belly button and breathing into that place and like anchoring, either like envisioning like a tree trunk or something, right? That's very like it's gonna have roots and it's gonna go down. I like putting my bare feet in the grass, or like if I'm in my
Mm.
gardens, bare feet, bare hands in the dirt. Um, those kinds of things can be really grounding. As you know, Clarissa, I got out and I went on an adventure the other day, and there was moss growing on a tree. And I went over to, and I had to make sure to like put my hands on the moss in the tree. Even just being outside and like looking at trees, looking at rocks, looking at dirt, listening for animals in the area. Just getting, that fresh air, though it's not very fresh for us right now. It's so smoky out here, but
Mm.
still, it's that it smells a bit like campfire, which can be very grounding for me. Um, you know,
Yeah, and
um,
fall does have a smell. Like I
it
will
does have a
say, me
smell.
and Jody
Yeah.
were walking and I was like,
Yeah.
it's just this like, I don't know, these leaves on the wet leaves on the ground kind of, or pine
Yeah.
needles smell.
Yeah. And the crunch of leaves right now,
Yeah.
right? So thinking about those different senses, like you were talking about, that comforting item, so like maybe you have like a worry rock, or maybe you have you guys, not that you guys can see it right now, but if you watch the video of this, right, like this is one of those I don't even remember what they're called, but it's like filled with the beads or whatever. You put it in the microwave, it warms up,
Oh, and is
and
it a sloth?
it is a sloth, and it
I
has a
love
scent.
it.
Yeah, it's my comfy. So I use it when I'm sick, right? So like I'll put it on my throat if I've got a sore throat or whatever. But sometimes I literally just want this warm, and it has a scent to it that it's just, so it's scent, it's got a heat, and it has a weight to it, right? And like I can put it on my chest or I really like it on my neck and my chest, those kinds of things. Or even like you were saying that the mantra or the saying, right? Like all is well, I am safe, you're okay.
Mhm.
And finding that tone of voice, right? Where it's almost like a hum in your,
Mm.
do you know what I mean? Like how you're not like in your falsetto, like excited voice, but it's just like, you're okay, you're all right. Like finding that intonation where it like shows up in your chest even can just be
Mhm.
really grounding. I think it's important to talk about food here though too, because
Mhm.
again, food can be very grounding for us.
Mhm.
And so if you notice that whatever, and maybe it's your mealtime, whatever, you can think about things that are very grounding for you. Now, not thinking about those typical quote unquote comfort foods that are going to get us back into trouble, but just grounding things that just really bring us back to our body, that are like really nourishing for us. And this time of year, it might be something like apples and pears and Brussels sprouts and
Squash.
squash, and right, those things that are in season right now that we think of when we think of fall harvest. So as
Mhm.
long as they aren't lighting up your brain like a Christmas tree, they can be very grounding. So thinking about centering meals around those kinds of things. Also colors. So like the dark, like blacks, browns, those deep greens, deep reds, like think about the deep purples, the colors that you're seeing right now outside, if you're in the northern hemisphere anyway, those can be very grounding for us too. So you can wear those colors, you can like look for them as you look outside. The trees are all changing right now. I would say those are all very grounding things. They're sensory, they're visual, whatever, and they're free. Like that's the
Yeah.
beautiful thing, is like most of what we're talking about today is free, short of paying somebody, for a yoga class or a Tai Chi class or a massage. all of this stuff is free. You can even do self massage, right? Like we talk about pressure points, like on our hands, on different points of our body that we can get in there with oils that have scents, whatever. You can really combine some of this stuff. Or maybe you do live with somebody, you have a partner or a friend or somebody who's willing to like do that kind of thing for you. I even like having somebody brush and braid my hair.
Yeah, I
Right.
like that too. Like, I like going to the hairdresser just because when she washes your hair, she does a bit of
Yeah.
a
The
massagey.
massage. Yeah,
Yeah. No, it's
definitely.
true. And I think one last thing to bring up is if you have animals, use them,
Yeah.
particularly,
Yeah.
dogs, because what we know about dogs is they actually can give us oxytocin. Um, and we can give them and we can get it from them. And that's very regulating for us. And, if you're somebody who, you don't have to co regulate with people, our pets are usually pretty good at helping us co regulate because they tend to be pretty, for the most part, depends if it's a rescue, right? We've all got even our pets have trauma. But again,
I'm one of my dog's emotional support human
yeah,
is what my husband.
my dog's a stage 5 clinger. So
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes, she's not regulating, she's smothering.
Yeah.
But again, it's like we can use pets, whether it's just thinking about, your cat that gets all cozy and like, it just stretches and,
Mhm.
you just want to give it a little pet. Those kind of things can be very co regulating for us as well.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah, I think overall, I think the biggest takeaway that I want people to have is that it's simple, but it's not easy. We do not have
Hmm.
to overcomplicate this. I think our inclination is to want to overcomplicate it, and we certainly do not
Always,
have to. Yeah, we certainly don't have to.
always.
But what it does require is some action on our part.
Hmm.
And so like to really think about, what actions make the most sense to you. And some days are going to look different than others, and that there's no right or wrong answer here. But what we do need is consistency. In order for this to like be effective, there has to be consistency, not perfection, but consistency. And this is where my biggest recommendation always, 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 always is think about these things and practice these things when you don't actually feel it, like when you're not in crisis. I don't want to say when you don't need them, because we always need
We
them,
always need them.
honestly. But when you're not in crisis, not when you're
Yeah,
not in that sympathetic or
activated
super
state.
dorsal,
Yeah.
yeah, when you're not on one end of the major, you're not in those extremes, you're more toward that regulated or window of tolerance kind of space, so that you can recall them. Like you were even saying, like you'll crave it in those moments even, or you'll look forward to it. Like I've got my rituals that set me up for the day, and when I don't get to do them, I like feel like I'm missing something, right? Like
Hmm.
I almost become dysregulated because I haven't had that practice. So, just thinking about those things, sometimes it's like lighting a candle, whatever, like any of those things that are going to
Hmm.
bring you back to like
Yeah.
that restful, peaceful place. And again, you don't always want to be there. And even within that window of tolerance, there are going to be ups and downs. It's about, can you ride it? Right? Can you cope? And when you're in that hyper space, can you use something other than food? Because food is not a skill, though it is biologically
Hmm.
wired in you to use it to get back into that rest and digest. Can you use something other than that? And when you're in that dorsal vagal, can you use something other than food to like up,
Bring you
like
back at,
ramp you
yeah.
up? What are those other things you can do? And if you are not able to do this on your own, that's okay. There are lots of people out there who are willing to help you. Just reach out. I mean,
Hmm.
you and I do free consultations. We have groups that are like pretty low cost, that people can come to, and we do nervous system regulation at the beginning of
At the
every
beginning of
single group.
everyone.
We will stop in the middle
That's
of
how
group
much
if we
we
have
believe in
to.
it.
I
Yeah.
know, like we will pause a group and just regulate with people if we notice, if the person in front of us is dysregulated, or if we notice somebody else is dysregulated, we will, right? Like, because when we are in that place, we can't take in what we need to take in anyway, and we certainly then can't leave and go take the action that we need to take, because
Yeah.
all of our energy expenditure is going toward fight, flight,
Survival.
safety, survival.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts,
No,
Clarissa?
I think I loved our conversation today.
Yeah.
I am eager to hear how the listeners felt about it, and I want to make sure to let them know we'll talk about anything. So
Yeah.
if you guys have if anyone listening has ideas for topics that you would like us to cover in Clinicians Corner, let us know. And we're going to be
Yeah.
trying to do these like, maybe, I don't know, 6 times a year. We'll figure it out
We'll
what
figure it
works,
out. Yeah.
or once a quarter. But we're very happy to discuss anything that you feel is, maybe affecting your food addiction recovery. And you want a clinical perspective on, how might we treat it or work with it and give you some skills and tools.
Definitely. And you can email those suggestions or questions even that you might have to info@sweetsobriety.ca. And we'll
Awesome.
make sure to have that in the show notes. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right.
Yay.
This was so much fun. Thanks,
Super
everyone.
fun. If you like what you heard today, please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching.